that they had down there?
Oh, Wine and Dine's my
Put
favorite.
that guy.
Good afternoon.
Right.
I'm Douglas Kellner, co-chair. I'm calling the meeting to order. Introduce the other commissioners.
Peter Kusinski. Gregory Peterson.
Andy Spinell.
Would the staff persons present introduce themselves, please?
Bob Brem.
Brian Quayle.
Brendan Lavello.
Mark Goldhaber.
Lisa Sugarman.
Bill McCann.
Jim Galvin. Don Valentine.
Bob Warren.
Thank you. And we ask our guests to identify us themselves.
Jennifer Wilson, League of Women Voters.
Welcome to you. The first item of business on our agenda is approval of the minutes for December 15th, which include the public minutes and the executive minutes for December 15th. Those in favor say aye.
I'll second. I'm sorry, aye. Apologize.
We need to vote.
Did we need a
Opposed?
second?
We need to vote.
I'll do both.
All right, so the December 15th minutes are adopted. We have not yet adopted the executive minutes for November 17th. And we will work on revising them. John, I had one comment about a style comment for the executive minutes, that I would suggest that we follow the New York Times style of not using last names without a title. So it'd be Commissioner so-and-so or Ms. so-and-so, as opposed to just using the last name. I think it reads better and a little more formal.
Do you want to put those off again?
I understand that there was still drafting issues that were going back and forth and that did not get resolved because of the flood. And I guess that we'll turn to the unit reports and start with the executive directors, who I'm sure will.
Well, it's been a number of items that we've worked on since your last meeting. I think in the last several days, it kind of was the major issues, of course. Wednesday, when the pipe burst on the 8th floor and the impact on the staff, I have to say, for the amount of damage that was done, OGS, I think, did a great job in having 2 meetings a day, keeping us informed of what the issues were and in hearing from us what we needed to get back in as quickly as we could to clean the damage. Generally speaking, from where we are holding this meeting to the corner of the building closest to the Hilton Hotel parking garage is the part that was mostly damaged, and that includes compliance and enforcement. And it did knock out, the biggest issue I think that caused us the delay getting back on the floor was it knocked out the fire detection and suppression for the whole floor. So the fire marshal was a little bit reluctant to allow them to turn on electricity until they got that detection system back up and running in case there was a spark that led to a fire. Certainly wasn't going to allow people to be on the floor without that working. But we've identified a number of cubicles. People are all in some temporary location. Today is the first day we're back in the building. And while it's not ideal, we're still working to determine how temporary it will be and what the best circumstances to get people at least able to get their records and do work and get back to normal as quickly as possible. But it certainly took an awful lot out of people. Everybody helped to get the word out, so everybody knew not to come to Albany because they couldn't access the floor. In addition to that, I think that the normal routine work, we, other than the agenda items that are there, that all of the units in the building work together with us to put before you. Certainly we're into the Q&A of the presidential election cycle. Todd and I did update the summary of what the difference between the 2 plans and posted that on the website so that people wanting to be delegates or at least to have a better understanding how the process worked had a document that they can look at All the calendars have been posted to the website for the presidential, the federal, and the draft state and local for the whole year. So we continue to start to get those questions that people have about being a delegate, et cetera, or even from, the campaigns, how do they become candidates in New York State. We start the Election Commissioners Conference today at 4 at the Hilton Hotel. It will end on Thursday morning, so certainly we're all working to do a number of presentations. It just so happened that our presentations from the State Board coincide with the governor calling that day to do his State of the State and his budget message. So we will be at the Election Commissioners because that's our slot to give the presentation. Other than that, I think, Todd, if you have any other items to add to the list.
No, and part of that, as Bob mentioned, that we'll also see the budget presentation will come out that same day, so we'll know exactly what our budget is at that point. Again, we're expecting a zero growth budget, so shouldn't be any surprises, but we'll see when it finally comes out. And, just the one thing that, like you do with any disaster, is after we finish getting through this and the rehabilitation for the affected areas, is to look what we can do better. The one thing certainly that I can say that we can do better at is, and this has never happened in 20 years, we've never actually had to call all the staff and tell them not to do something, because we never close. This is the first time we've ever had to do that, and it worked. But, it was, hey, tell a friend. It was a very informal network. There were Facebook postings. There was a lot of that going on. And within units, we didn't have any formal process, which we should, Normally, it's not something we've never had to do that. But I suppose we have to put that into our emergency plans. It's just not something we had ever anticipated. Evacuating, yes. Fire, all that stuff. Evacuation, everything went smooth. But then, how do you tell people to come back? Like, I don't know. I don't have all their home phone numbers. They're all, I don't know how accurate they are. I mean, they're emergency contacts and all, but it's not necessarily home phone numbers. So, and they were in the building. So, we'll work on that in the future.
All right, any questions? We'll move to the Council and Compliance Unit, Kim Galvin and Brian Quayle.
Thank you, Commissioner. First, the periodic for January 15th, 2016. Obviously, that deadline approaching on Friday. And the staff, notwithstanding the flood, is making all the necessary preparations with the system to receive those influx of filings and to handle them accordingly. The campaign finance disclosure reports that have been filed, compliance reviews are continuing and ongoing. Obviously, lost a little bit of productivity as a result of the 3 days of downtime, but we'll be picking that up. There is a CLE training associated with the Commissioner's workshop that is, I believe, on Thursday at 9 a.m. at the Hilton, and I think that registrations are still available for that if people want to go to our website and sign up for that. Also, the unit continued to participate in FIDUS redesign meetings with ITU, and that project is advancing. With respect to key focuses of the unit over the course of the last month, a substantial amount of staff time was spent reviewing and coming to consensus in many instances on a legislative program, which is later on the agenda. Some more detail there will come out during that discussion. Also, a phase one, as I would call it, of the IE regulation. A considerable amount of time and effort was placed into preparing that for the commissioners, and preparing which has not yet been circulated, but the annual case law update that we do, which last year came out in early February. Substantial progress has been made on preparing that document. And
On December 16th, there were oral arguments in the Brennan Center LLC case in Greene County. And the two sides of the board's position were represented there, and there were subsequent filings that occurred. And it's expected, per the judge, that a decision in that case will be very soon. And did I miss anything, Kim?
Not that I can tell. You have anything there?
Could you tell us what the status is of revising the manual and also setting up the training sessions for political clubs?
Yes. There has been a staff level discussion both as to curriculum for a club training and actually a draft PowerPoint presentation has been produced by Cheryl Kauser, and we're readying that for sharing with our colleagues. But there are important policy questions that we are discussing as we speak about how to deal with some of these questions, and there's a necessity to have, in my opinion, anyway, a conversation with the Enforcement Council to make sure that any advice that we give is advice that people can rely on, and to the extent that there's ambiguity, we need to be able to identify those ambiguities. To the extent there are policy questions that need to come to the board for resolution, that may be an outgrowth of that process as well. But that is occurring.
Good, thank you. Anything else? Election operations, Brendan Lagilla.
We have later on the ES&S Phase 2 upgrade that we're doing. We've also been getting ready for commissioner training. The staff will be doing training on EMS with all the commissioners and staff that will be coming in over the next couple days. Staff is also collecting and preparing the annual report and all the submissions. We're only missing a few from some of the counties so far. Working on the Dominion utility, which we talked about last time, and I think that's about it.
Any other questions?
Nope.
All right. Public information, John Conklin.
Thank you, Commissioner. Public information has been busy with questions about the presidential primary, voter registration deadlines. As Brian mentioned, the next campaign finance filing deadline, which is January 15th. There were 47 FOIL requests during the month of December. Tom and I continue to participate in the Nice Voter Refresh and Campus Vitus ongoing meetings. For the website, we posted the presidential primary ballot access requirements and the general election results that were approved at the last meeting. You have anything to add, Tom?
I think the only things I would add is just that obviously we've been working somewhat on some of the conference presentations with the different units and their information. And we actually got a request this morning from one county board, since they're going to be in the area for the conference, if they could get some nice voter training for some of their new staff. So Patrick and Greg are going to be providing that to them on Thursday afternoon.
Anything else? All right. Information technology, Mark Goldhaber.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have been scrambling to get everything back up and running following the flood. I found out about the flood as I got off a plane in Florida, so I was working with my team remotely as best as possible, and they did an amazing job in getting everything diagnosed and up and working, and temporary setups for everybody that has been displaced in my absence, and they did a great job. Following a meeting last week, we got some better definition on what needs to be worked out to get approval to move forward with some of the Campus Vitus design. So we have a number of meetings scheduled next week to try to get that moving forward. The work with the county VPNs is now underway. We had a couple of bumps that have been resolved. We now are looking to have the initial test rollouts, if all goes smoothly, at the end of this month, and we're hoping to get them all rolled out within a month after the initial first 3 configurations go out. We will be working with each of the counties because in the current design, there will be something that we have to do at the time that the new device goes in. So on their end, they'll replace their device, and then we'll take care of something on our end, and we will work with them to make sure that it's working properly. So we will have the secure connections to the counties, hopefully completed by the end of February.
Mark, that's part of Nysvoter?
That's the part of the Nysvoter infrastructure refresh, correct. We've finished ironing out,
So
sorry.
why do you get involved in a county? VPN is virtual private network?
Yes. We provide the equipment for the secure connection between their site and our site. And so because we provide the device to them, we have to make sure that it's configured properly to secure the connection between the 2 sites. So the old device that we currently have out with the counties is obsolete and needs to be replaced, and there's currently a known vulnerability with it. So we're working as quickly as possible to get these new devices out there so that we can better secure the connections between the counties and our site. We've ironed out some of the other speed bumps with the Nysvoter project. We think that all of the staffing issues with the contractor should be resolved. They have a new network person that's starting this week, and with luck, we are going to be able to get everything done before the end of the contract. If not, I'm working with them on contingencies because I want them to be on the hook for anything that does not get done by the time that they said it was going to get done. And just to build off of what Todd said, we do need to work on improving the business continuity plan, not just, in terms of notifying everybody, but in terms of having a set plan rather than, okay, stuff is broken, how are we gonna resolve this? We have a plan, but we need to tighten it up to make sure that the stuff that wasn't addressed that we discovered this weekend is addressed in the plan. That's all I got.
Any questions? All right, and enforcement, Lisa Sugarman.
Good morning, Commissioners. As we've discussed with Bob and a little bit with Brian, my division was the most the biggest part of the office that was had an impact from the flood. My entire staff is now displaced into the library of the Board of Elections, and I thank the board for allowing us to invade their space and allowing us to use that location. So Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday took all of the time to, first Wednesday, to make sure that we were able to move our files, and we were able to do that while the rain was coming down in the office. We came upstairs, I had some staff come upstairs, and we moved our file cabinets away. So our files, our paper were fine. We didn't have any damage in that. Our floors are damaged. The rugs in my particular office and along the windows have been pulled up. It hasn't been decided yet what's going to happen, whether they're going to just replace those or remove and replace the entire carpet. Commissioner Kozinski has seen it. I invite the rest of you, I'll take you for a tour if you'd like to see the office space. Our printer, our fax machine, and our shredder are all damaged and will have to be replaced. So we, I was able over the weekend to work remotely, did some work, but we have been delayed for the 3 days. I was working on my stats, that has been a little delayed. But we are continuing now, and really that's all I have to report. It's our work has been a little mixed up in the last couple of days, but we're still getting phone calls and we're still working, and hopefully we'll be back in our space shortly. We won't have ceiling tiles, and maybe we'll have some hit or miss carpet tiles, but hopefully we'll be back, and we are operational, but hopefully we'll be back in our space in a little while.
Okay. Any questions? All right, then we move to old business, update on the Freedom of Information Law voter registration records.
This is an issue where, in the interests of having uniformity of approach to handling requests for copies of voter registration information, given some of the statutory provisions that are out there, the board informally authorized circulating a draft policy or directive on this subject to the county boards for their comments. As of today, I believe we have received back 6 comments from county boards, and also Bob Freeman with the Committee on Open Government has also opined informally on the regulation, and we're continuing to receive comments. And we expect that as a result of the Election Commissioners Conference, which is occurring in Albany this week, that during that process, or that conference, we will receive additional comments and feedback. Substantively, some of the things that have sort of come up is that one of the commenters was very thorough, and it pointed out that we have a miscitation in our last citation. We have 6215.5, and it should be 6212.5. And so it's nice that people are reading and examining this very closely. Also, there seems to be some concern out there about the final provision in the proposed policy dealing with the time frame for responding, which in all fairness is also something that our PIO noted as the draft policy was being worked through. There's a provision there that while it's not mandatory, it asks boards to respond to document requests within 1 business day, and some of the boards have indicated that even aspirationally, that could be potentially a problem for their operational concerns. One way of mitigating that's been suggested is placing that standard in the context of when someone needs something to facilitate a ballot challenge, as opposed to not an across-the-board standard, but when it's necessary. Because one of the things that this is designed to do is to recognize that when you only have 14 days to sue, or 3 days to generally object, or 6 more days to specifically object, every single day really matters to you in terms of getting at the information that you need to review documents. And in the same respect, if you're responding to someone's challenge of your documents, you have the exact same timing concerns. So even though the language in that provision is not mandatory, it's aspirational, there was a great deal of concern sort of mentioned about that. And one of the ways to deal with it might be to better explain the context of when speed is of the essence, and asking boards to do the best they can. And I would also note that there's no evidence that they're not doing that already. I think most boards, if not all of them, are very sensitive to the fact that when they need to provide information for those purposes, they need to be acting expeditiously. Other issues that are sort of part and parcel with this that have sort of come up is there's a provision in the statute that with respect to information that comes out of Nysboe, the one statewide list, persons who request that information for other than election-related purposes are not entitled to that information. It's essentially a provision, I think, that was added by the legislature when the big list was formed to avoid commercial exploitation of the information that might invade voters' privacy on a mass scale, or even on a small scale for that matter. But I think they were sensitive to the fact that the danger was greater when such a huge amount of information could be acquired on a single CD. So one of the things that came up is, does the provision that relates to not allowing information for non-elective or non-election related purposes to be provided out of Nysboe also apply to the counties, inasmuch as the county systems and the state system are communicating with each other, and it's essentially one data set. And in that vein, there was a comment from Schenectady County on that, and then Bob Freeman in his comments noted that that based on the Freedom of Information law, there can be a denial of providing list information when its purpose is commercial. So that's sort of my update on how I read the comments as of now, and we're continuing to receive them.
I just have a couple things. I just wanted, Brian, you made reference to this as a potential regulation. Is this going to rise to the level of being an actual regulation by the board?
I hope I didn't use the word regulation. I may have used the word directive. Among the powers of the board is to issue a directive to county boards of elections in the form of guidance, which is mandatory. I'm not sure that necessarily requires the adoption of it as a regulation, but certainly it's the prerogative of the board to determine what course it would like to set on that issue.
So you're seeing this ultimately as being a directive where if the boards don't follow it, what happens?
It would be my vision, Commissioner, but my vision doesn't matter if it's inconsistent with yours. But it would be my vision, Commissioner, that it be a directive to the county, because the purpose of it is to set a uniform standard so that these kinds of issues are dealt with in the same way across the state.
I'm just trying to understand, though, the ability of this board to require
Sure.
a county board to function in a certain way vis-a-vis FOIL.
Right.
But the statute gives us the authority to issue directives and to modify local county procedures, but not a whole lot of enforcement authority, short of going to court, which we have never done. But we have issued directives from time to time.
Well, then, I mean, as I recall, this issue arose because of a signature question. Isn't that fair to say? Or am I recollecting that correctly, that the issue of FOIL compliance came up in the context of whether a board would provide signatures?
Copy of a signature.
Copy of a signature to a requester, that there was some concern, as I recall, on the board's part, that would violate some privacy concerns that a voter might have, and they were reluctant to turn that over.
Putnam, I mean,
Because of those
specifically
privacy
Putnam
issues.
County did
Right.
not.
I mean, that's what prompted this. So, I mean, you're getting into
Right.
issues now that I don't think were the concern of the original question that arose in this context. And now you're starting to get into timeframes for people to comply, which, I mean, I guess we can look at. But as far as the signature issue goes, is that addressed here as far as what boards can and cannot do with a voter's signature? Because I can see the concern that voters have in this realm where you're divulging my signature, say, to someone, and then the concern about how that's used.
Yes, I think that it is. The main statutory provision sort of in focus is an election law provision 3-220, which provides for documents of the Board of Elections to be public documents. And then there are other provisions of the law that came along later and have dealt with when the board is aggregating signatures and it is capturing signatures, how it treats the captured signatures. And so there is among the boards of elections, there is at least has been some dichotomy of views as to how all of these statutory provisions interrelate with one another. So the main attempt here is to make clear that documents that contain original documents, photocopies of them that contain signatures, are not, as a matter of law, unavailable to people requesting them. At the same time, the legislature determined at the time that Nysboe, the statewide list, was created, that some protections needed to be attached to digitized signatures, or the phrase that I use to describe them is harvested signatures, so that you couldn't sort of have this reservoir of signatures electronically that you could be plunking down into other documents. And so the regulation makes clear that computer-generated facsimile signatures are not to be disseminated except in the instances that the statute has articulated they may be. But that regulation and that statute, so the regulation that goes along with it, was not designed to upend the notion that a voter registration document is a public document.
I'm not clear, I guess. So are you saying that in this directive, as you're calling it, that has been drafted, that has been clarified to the counties as to how they should treat signatures, and you've not gotten any feedback from the counties on that particular topic?
No, there have been, I summarize sort of the main feedback, and I don't know if the specific comments, I assumed they'd been shared with all the commissioners. I know on our side.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and they are relatively brief, and I think what might make the most.
I may have, I don't think I've read them.
Right, what might make the most sense is if I can actually, pass them up to you if you'd like, and certainly not to want to interpose myself between the decision makers and the people who are making the comments, because it's not a particularly vast reservoir of material that we've gone through. But there have been other substantive comments by the commissioners. In one instance, a commissioner simply indicating that they disagree with the proposal. Another commissioner indicating that in section E, the section that I referred to, that we use the word should in the description, in the heading, but then use must. And there was some concern about the timing element being interpreted as being mandatory as opposed to strongly aspirational. And then in the comments from Schenectady County, there were several questions that were asked, and in particular whether or not the county was free to use the procedure, or the language in their FOIL form that precluded disclosing the information if it was going to be used for commercial purposes. And a comment from a commissioner asking sort of general questions about the preamble. And certain questions dealing with potentially specific circumstances. So there's, and again, I expect that we'll be receiving more comments, and the commissioner certainly should have them all.
Well, I would suggest at the conference this week that this might be something we solicit more comments on from the counties, because I think it's an important issue. I did notice in your recitation that there didn't seem to be anybody that actually addressed the signature question or had a particular comment on the signature question. But that,
Well,
there
that
was
said,
one.
I
There
think
was
it would be,
one.
I think it'd be useful if at the conference we could try to solicit more comments from the counties as to how they view this and, issues they may or may not see with this. I will say before I would be willing to issue a directive, I'd want to understand all the issues that the counties may be facing here. And I think this 24-hour rule, for example, we need to look at, because as we know, FOIL allows 5 days for compliance. To reduce it to 24 hours is pretty severe. And as you said, my sense is that in the context of these petition challenges, the counties do make an effort to get information to the objectors or the candidates in order for them to meet those tight time frames. So I don't even know if this is really an issue out there. I'm not aware that it is. Maybe it is somewhere, but I'm not aware that people are withholding information that challengers and/or candidates need in that context, so I don't know how big a deal it is. But I certainly think there should be some effort here to get more feedback than these 6.
Absolutely.
From the counties, if this is gonna be sent out to them, then I think we have an opportunity this week, so I don't know if you have any time that you've designated at the conference to maybe talk about this a little bit, but I would encourage you to do that.
There are a couple places on the schedule where it could come up, and it definitely was in the plan that it was going to. I don't know specifically which spot in the program it will come up, but it will. As one minor point of clarification, while some of the boards that responded did react with great concern to that section on timing, that section does say whenever reasonably possible. But those words of limitation were not sufficiently comforting to all. So no, it's a complicated issue.
And
It's a
it
very
may
important
be,
issue.
I think that it makes sense to emphasize the need for expeditious response during the petition challenge.
Except that you don't want to be in a position where you are changing the law as it exists. We as an administrative body doing that, I think is beyond what we should be doing.
No, but if
We
you
can certainly suggest, look, I ran for office, so you, Andy, so we understand there are time constraints at certain points, and we really want to get that information very quickly. But to oppose that when the foil does not, I think is pushing the envelope.
I think we agree. It's just trying to find the right language to,
Even the FOIL language says 5 days for an answer, it doesn't say for compliance.
That's true.
You're right.
You can put
I
them
mean,
off
you
again.
can put them off.
No, I realize that, and I think, having worked in the elections arena a long time, I know that those time frames don't always work, because you have a 3-day window to object. You have 6 days to do a spec. I mean, you just don't have the luxury of waiting 5 days or being put off because they said they can't do it. So, I mean, the realities of the situation are, those don't always work. But again, to give them a directive that says 1 day seems, maybe more than I want to do. That's all I'm saying. I think we need to look at it and then come up with something that's workable
I agree.
with the counties as
I agree.
well. Because sometimes they get overwhelmed. I mean, I can easily see in a context of especially a small county that may have several objectors coming in, to turn it around in 24 hours is going to be difficult, and then it's which one do I do first and how do I do that? And I just want to be cautious because people will use that directive, and I want to be sure the counties are comfortable and are able to comply with what we think is reasonable.
But, just as this could be used that way. A lot of people are always overwhelmed, and that's used. So it's good to have a direction that people can follow, whether it's a directive or it's something that's advised, we can take that up later.
Okay.
all right, so we'll, I thank you for your efforts in a very thorough report, and we'll continue this as old business, so we'll get a follow-up report at the next meeting. All right, so next is the resolution proposing amendments to Part 6200, Section 10 of our regulations. Those are the independent expenditure regulations.
Sure. Per the Commissioner's directives, Brian and I put together, in this version, an update to make the regulations in the first phase comport to the statutory amendments that were made in April in the budget. And our next task after this would be to focus specifically on, we already have started the conversation, but to work towards a conclusion on coordination.
I just want to understand in my own mind then, as to what these constitute. So is there anything in the proposal before us that in any way goes beyond basically a simple recitation of what the statutory changes were in this past year to
No.
this particular provision?
No.
So in essence, as I understand it, these amendments amend the old regulations to just incorporate the changes to the independent expenditure statute that was enacted this past session, 2015.
Correct. And with one modification, Commissioner Kozinski, you had asked for some factors under definitions of membership organization, et cetera, to clarify whether something would or would not lead to the conclusion that, for instance, you were or were not. And so we did make that change. But that had been already discussed in Kathleen's previous iteration that was brought to the board. So there was nothing, it was that same concept was already in the earlier draft. So with that, with those exceptions, the main focus is on the statutory provision.
But this does not eliminate the discussion. This is a phase one situation.
Oh, yeah,
We
there's no
discussed
question.
the last time, right?
Well, I would just comment on this one, and I think that part of our goal needs to be, as we draft regulations that are carrying forth the statutory provision, that we try to provide guidance in those regulations for people who are working their way through the statute. I'm not sure these have gone far enough. I think what these have done is basically take the statute and take it and put it into regulation. So in essence, if I'm a person who's looking to function in this arena, the independent expenditure arena, I'm not really gonna get much more out of these regulations on what to do than I would just reading the statute itself. And it seems to me the goal of the statute should be to help me understand how to read the statute, so that I, am given some guidance by the agency that's going to enforce it, how I should read the statute so I understand it better than just reading the statute itself. Or, it sort of begs the question, what's the purpose of a regulation if it just restates the statute? And I will say there's some portions of this that I think are difficult to read and really understand exactly what they're meant to say and how they're going to be implemented and interpreted. And I think we should be making efforts to try to flesh out these statutes in our regs to say, in this case, this is what this means. When you're doing this, this is what you should do, so it's clear. And I think, I think in this arena, and this goes to the second portion of what we're talking about, which is, getting into the whole arena of, when are you truly independent? What factors do you use? Because I think giving guidance to people is part of our job, to help people who are working in this area, to give them some guidance as to how they should act. So I would just encourage that as we work through these regulations and as we continue to work on them, which I think we should do, that we look at that and see if we can't do better, frankly, in trying to explain what some of these provisions mean. That's my
Commissioner, I will endorse that concept, that this was the preliminary draft that everybody could agree on, and I think we've all stated our position that this is just phase one of the amendments. Kathleen O'Keefe prepared a draft that went into many of the substantive issues that you've raised, and we are waiting for a response to that draft. And I'm just wondering what the timetable that you have in mind on when.
It wasn't my understanding you were waiting for a response to her draft. I thought that we were gonna work together and do phase one and then work together to come up with coordination efforts, not respond to the document already in place.
So if I can offer, the differential, and it's not a substantive one, it's a process one, is that when we agreed that we were going to take out coordination and deal with the other elements, this is what we have. But with respect to coordination, one of the things that we've indicated is that it would be helpful having sort of a democratic version of coordination, which is embodied in Kathleen O'Keefe's draft, that it would be very helpful, just as we reconciled the other drafts that dealt with that non-issue, is if there would at some point be a proposal from you on what your model would be, and then we can work through doing that. And we did indicate that that would be helpful. That's not a criticism. That's just part of the process as it's evolving in terms of having two drafts on coordination and then reconciling them, as opposed to an amorphic discussion that doesn't get us into words on the paper.
Well, certainly we could work on that. That's not an issue.
Can we get a timetable on when that's gonna happen?
Sure.
What about February 23rd, which is our next meeting?
I think it depends on how the discussions go, to be honest. I don't think we can.
Now, well, we're getting into big season, elections and so on, and this is a good time to do that. Look, February would be a good date.
If we can get there, February would be a good date.
All right. So while we adopt this resolution today, which will at least post this Phase 1 amendment out for public comment, can we also then carry the issue as old business and get a report at
Sure.
the next meeting?
Sure, and I'll move that these be adopted. No, these are going out for public comment, is that the situation?
That's all, it's
Yep.
just public comment.
Well, I'll move these
so-
for that purpose, the ones in front of us.
Second.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so the resolution is adopted unanimously, and we will have a follow-up report on the Phase 2 draft at the next meeting. Okay, now we move to new business, the 2016 legislative packet.
Brian's doing double duty on this.
Yeah, you know, we did the best we could with the, right at the time of getting our packet done was when all access to the computers was shut off, so.
Plus Christmas and New Year's.
All right, well, so where do we stand right now?
So, Commissioner, we have in the materials that the commissioners have, there is a description of 20 consensus proposals at the staff level, and the council's office is continuing to work on a number of other items as well. But these, on a consensus basis, we're prepared to recommend to the commissioners. The extent to which the commissioners would like a recitation of these items for us to go through them in detail, because I know they're in your packet materials, we can accommodate you at whatever level of discussion be your pleasure.
I always have a problem with exempting anyone from jury duty. I mean, there are very, very few people who are exempted from jury duty. Even the governor has to show up. And this is not like it's a volunteer thing that someone does.
Yeah.
And
They get paid.
And I thought I had commented before, and everyone agreed that we were gonna stop calling it exempting election workers from jury duty and to call it that election service counts as jury duty.
Well, if you don't get paid, I think it should count. Even though you do get paid for jury duty, we should use the same numbers.
You paid for both.
So can we drop that item from the list and then put that as something to revise for the next meeting?
Commissioner, we could certainly do that, or if you wanted to revise the title of it, we could do that as well. It's up to you.
The
Well,
courts
I think-
always hates
I
this.
think we have to redraft it so that it needs to
Yeah.
be
Say
dropped
the
from the
right-
list. And
Well,
then-
is the definition of election workers those who have performed duties as election officials? In which case, they would be exempt.
Well, I guess my point is to stop calling it first of all, it has virtually no chance of passage.
The courts hate it every year.
In that
which
case,
case,
I would.
It's been on our package for many years.
And,
We've asked for many years.
you know, in some states, Maryland in particular, they call the poll workers election jurors. And originally, historically, in New York, poll workers were recruited by the jury system. In other words, you got called to be it was a random selection of who would be the poll worker, who would be the inspector for a given election. In the early 19th century, that was the New York custom.
I'd say let it go as it is.
If you want to, I don't think we change it. If you're not-
Well, I'd like to
Well, if it
just
doesn't have a
move to
chance of
delete
passing,
it.
I don't care.
I move to delete it for now and, perhaps take a stab at redrafting it. It does mean retyping the list.
That's not hard.
All right,
Do
is
we
there,
need a motion on that?
yes, is there,
What do we
are
move?
there any other changes? Does anybody want to talk about anything else?
Commissioner Spano, I think you're moving to remove the jury duty one.
16-02.
Yeah, he asked what we were moving.
You want to move that now?
Move the list,
All right.
with the exception of
Yeah.
16-02.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so that's adopted. Next item is the resolution to, and the testing on the ES&S central count system upgrades. We have the resolution in front of us. I have just one comment, is that I was particularly annoyed that the original report that was forwarded to us was labeled proprietary and confidential. I thought that we've raised this issue enough beforehand that the operations department would notify vendors in advance rather than forward those reports to the commissioners. And so I realized that once I raised the issue, ES&S immediately withdrew the confidential designation. But the fact that it went out to the commissioners with that designation on it is of concern to me. And I don't know whether the other commissioners share my view, but that we should, I would ask that the operations unit take a more aggressive role initially with the vendors instead of escalating it to the commissioner level, to remind the vendors that these reports and proposals should not be arbitrarily labeled confidential and proprietary.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with making that directive. Normally, when they submit documents to a state, are they considered, is that how the label attaches? That's their normal process of treating their information in that way?
Yeah.
If they attach the label, then we cannot disclose the
No, I understand the
information in
issue.
a
Fair
FOIL
enough. No,
request.
I understand, but I'm just.
They always remove it when we ask. I think it's
Yeah.
just,
That's just their normal
Yeah.
process, is they always do that, and you've
Yeah.
got to, you've always
The
got to-
regulation requires that if they're really, I mean, some just label everything.
Right.
The regulation with regard to voting equipment is, because it's a transparent process, as to the extent it can be, is only where there are security or truly confidential, but then it's up to the vendor not to label the whole document
Sure.
confidential, but those items within it, and then we would have to redact those.
And the burden is on them to
They're supposed to
demonstrate
submit
that
to
it's
us at the
truly-
time of making the initial filing, that portion which is and that portion which is
Yeah.
not, so that we know how to treat it when we have it.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, I agree with Commissioner
Okay.
Kellner. I think we should make sure the vendors are aware, this is our policy, this is how we expect to get documents, this shouldn't be happening. I agree with that, so whatever it takes to inform
Yep.
them of that, I would encourage you to do as well.
Thank you. All right, so all of that being said, I'll move the adoption of the resolution and call for a vote. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the resolution is adopted. I believe we've already agreed that our next meeting date is February 23rd, which is necessary because of the petition objection process for the federal primary. I mean, for the presidential primary. All right, so we'll entertain a motion to go into executive session for review of the enforcement cases. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so we'll begin executive session. Do you want a break before?
Can we just take a minute?
I'd take a
Yeah.
Here's the-
Are you here now for?